Hi, my name is Tim. I struggle with myself. Anyway, this is what the lecture is about today. It's the second part of attribution, but really, the first part was kind of cut and dry. This part is where we're really going to talk about how we make these attributional patterns based on our own behavior and the consequences that these patterns have. So I have a bunch of different words I was going to interchange. Self-concept, that's how we see ourselves, our self-evaluation. But of course, our self-esteem comes into play. As that big word self, is how do you see yourself? We haven't gotten to the dating section, so I'll save that for later. Okay, our overall sense of self-evaluation and self-worth. So it does have self-concept in there, but is that self-concept good or bad? And so this is the thing I struggle with the most in the world. Okay, so you can have a high self-esteem, of course, or you can struggle over here. Hopefully you're not like Tim and struggle with this thing right here. Okay, so we'll get into this in just a little bit more detail. Okay, so here's your true self. I've been there a few times. Most of the time I was on psychedelics or with Molly or something else, to where I see my true self. Every once in a while I do. When I teach, I do. But there's a disparity. This is the way I see Tim over here. This is why most people don't understand Tim. They go, we see this kind, loving, wonderful, great guy that does all this stuff, and it's like, I don't see that. I'm not kidding you. I can talk to the prettiest girl in the world, and there would be this disparity there. And it's like, wait a minute. Why would you not feel great about yourself? And so I'm going to talk about this disparity between who you really are, because when you get in touch with your spirit, there's no self-esteem issue. When I'm tripping balls, I don't have self-esteem issue. You know what I mean? It's like when we get in touch with the world, sometimes it gets us off of our game and we forget who we are. Brach talks about this thing called the trance of unworthiness. And what I wanted to do for a minute is just to play you a meditation, not really a meditation, but just a little clip from one of her speeches on this idea about low self-esteem and the trance of unworthiness.
The understanding of Buddhism and Western psychology in an existential way is that whenever we incarnate, there's a sense of a self in here and a world out there. There's some sense of separation. And so that in an evolutionary way, we're designed to identify as a self, identify as some separate entity, and then try to control our environment to make it. Science has discovered that we wake up 10 times a night to scan our environment to make sure there's nothing wrong. And then we fall asleep, and unless we have a sleep disorder, actually we don't remember that. But it's our evolutionary advantage to be vigilant. Creatures have to be vigilant, and there's an undercurrent of something is either wrong or could go wrong in any moment. Now that doesn't necessarily translate to emotional suffering. Many mammals have emotions that are wired into them, many of the same emotions that we have. So it becomes interesting to sense, what is it that turns our rigging to have emotions into suffering? And in humans, what we have is a much more highly developed process of thinking, so that we can remember things from the past and plan in the future, unlike other creatures that we know about. And what this means is that when there's wounding, when there's some pain that we encountered, we have more access, more ability to dredge it up. We're motivated to bring it up so we don't have the experience again, and there's more of a compulsion to plan to avoid problems in the future. So that sense of something's wrong and the different ways that's expressed emotionally, whether it's shame or fear or anger, actually becomes a sustained state of mind. And our sense of who we are gets hitched to it. Most often what we're hitched to is the sense not only that something's wrong, but that something's wrong with me. And there's, in this culture, a lot that exacerbates that. We don't have much of a sense of natural belonging in our culture. and there's not a sense of real tribe or close community. So we each are given these standards that we have to meet in order to be okay, to be acceptable, to be lovable. And so we feel a sense of having to prove ourselves, to be special, to look a certain way, to act a certain way. And under that, the message is that our natural way of being is not okay. Now, this trance of not okay, of unworthiness, varies depending on our families and our genetics. When in a family situation we experience extreme kind of abuse or physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, then the wounding and the remembering and the obsessive thinking ahead are much more intense. But even when the wounding is not so obvious, our sense of not mattering, our sense of being invisible or not okay, can be quite deep. I know in one story I heard, a family was at a restaurant and parents and young boy, and they were ordering their food, and the parents made their order, and then the child said, well, I'll have hot dogs, French fries, and a Coke. At which point his dad said, oh, no, you won't. You'll have meatloaf and mashed potatoes and carrots. And the waitress just looked at the little boy and said, so, hon, what do you want on that hot dog? The family were kind of stunned. They just sat there. She left, and he looked at his parents, and he said, she thinks I'm real. When we are not paid attention to in a way we need, when we're not seen, when what matters to us isn't taken into account, when we're not loved the way we need to feel loved, there's a deep conclusion that we make, that I'm not lovable, that I don't matter, that I'm not worthwhile. And those raw feelings often are so painful to feel that we then organize ourselves around these strategies to feel better, to not have to feel that core sense of fear, I'll be rejected, I'll be alone, of hurt, of shame. So what happens is we do a cover-up. We do what we can to cover up the vulnerability, what I sometimes call the unlived life, the tangles and the wounds that are too painful to just feel. And I sometimes imagine it like we come onto this earth, this difficult atmosphere, and we develop a spacesuit of strategies to navigate our environment, to win approval, to win love, to cover over the insecurity. And we each have a set of strategies. We each have a spacesuit, kind of a mask that we present. For some, it's striving and accomplishing and trying to prove ourselves through our doings. There's also ways that we try to make ourselves invisible, a cloak of invisibility. And then, of course, for many, there's some ways of deceiving or exaggerating or pretending that our experience is different than it is. And for many in this culture, addictive behaviors to kind of cover over that raw vulnerability, getting fixated and addicted to sex or gambling, to drugs, to caffeine, to being entertained. But the most basic spacesuit strategy that we use that keeps us locked in a sense of deficiency is judgment. We blame others, resent others, and then in the most core way, we're at war with ourselves. And it's a spacesuit strategy. We're trying to fix ourselves, trying to be a better person, trying to get away from that raw, powerless feeling of not okay. So in the trance of unworthiness, we develop these coverings, these strategies, and we get identified with them. They become what most tells us who we are. One of the stories in the Buddhist world that has drawn a lot of attention is of a old temple in the ancient capital of Sukhothai in Thailand, where there's this enormous clay Buddha that's been repainted and cared for over the centuries. Not considered a particularly beautiful statue of a Buddha, but revered because it had survived all these storms and invasions and so on. But in recent years, there was this stretch of hot and dry weather. And the statue began to crack, and one of the cracks was big enough that a curious monk took a flashlight and looked inside to see if he could understand the infrastructure, what was inside the statue. And what shined back at him was the flash of gold. And he and the other monks looked into some of the other cracks, and they discovered that inside the statue was one of the largest, most luminous gold images of the Buddha ever created in Southeast Asia. And what's interesting to me is that the monks believed that this statue had been covered with plaster and clay to protect it from harm during periods of conflict and unrest. It's kind of like the spacesuit, that in a similar way, we humans, when we encounter difficulty, and we all do, we cover over our innate purity with these strategies, these ways of protecting and defending and proving. And we do it so much so that we forget our essential nature. We think we're the spacesuit, and we forget who's looking through.
Wow, I got a little verklempt every time I listen to Tara Brach. It's like I can't help but lose it when she talks about the spacesuit and how we cover over, this sense of vulnerability. Sorry about Little Big Planet, but we cover over with all these strategies. I mean, that's what I've been doing for the last 53 years. I don't understand it because I've seen myself, my true self, but Molly showed me my true self and let me take the spacesuit off, but then I put it back on because I know I was going back into this dangerous atmosphere, and I don't know a whole lot about self-love. I know a whole lot about self-hatred, unfortunately, but self-hatred cannot be fixed with other love. Ram Dass says, your problem is you're too busy holding on to your own unworthiness. Timothy, if anybody knows me, y'all know me, right? This is who I am, you know what I mean? It's the thing I know, but it can't be me. That's not really me, that's my spacesuit. And underneath there is the real me that y'all get to see sometimes and that I get to see a little bit less often. It's like, I have this quote, if you've never read Thich Nhat Hanh, you gotta read some Thich Nhat Hanh. He's the fucking bomb. He's a Buddhist Vietnamese monk, I think. Anyway, he says to be beautiful means to be yourself. You don't need to be accepted by others. You need to accept yourself. This is why I love gay people. The closet is not about being gay or what you do with your vagina or your penis. It has nothing to do with that. It's a place like the spacesuit that's safe. And if you can come out of the closet, you can say, this is me, I'm Tim. And you can be okay with it. And this is why I love gay people, because they can be okay with being themselves. And the other person I love is this guy right here, Mr. Rogers. He says this thing right here, I don't know if it's true. He says, you don't ever have to do anything sensational for people to love you. But my whole life I've spent doing that. If I could just be big enough, strong enough, faster, richer, prettier, something. It's all this ER. And you don't have to be ER. That's what's called the new covenant. You don't have to be bigger, stronger, richer, prettier for God to love you. He already loves you right now. You're just too busy holding on to your own unworthiness, Timothy. Wow, sorry for getting so emotional, but that's just me. So I wanted to talk about this guy, Rotter. Rotter in the 60s, same year I was born, 1966, talked about something that people struggle with, which is called locus of control. Who's in charge? Am I in charge? Or is the world in charge? So this goes directly to attribution theory. Some people think they're in charge of their own lives. Unfortunately, Rotter, he was a psychologist, when you come in, you just beat yourself up. If you have a shitty life, you go, it's all my fault. It's like, that's me. Okay, other people have external locus of control where they kind of feel like a feather in the wind, like the wind is blowing them about and they don't have any control. The world's in charge of their life. They have zero control of their life. So usually this is seen as a bad thing, external locus of control, but I'm going to get into this for a second. Internal locus, like I said, I make things happen. I am in charge. I do things. That seems like it should be healthy. And from an American perspective, that's the healthy perspective. This seems like a victim perspective, and we'll get into this in just a second. But I'm going to flip-flop it for a second because I teach psychology of religion and I talk about the Wu Wei, the path of least resistance. Instead of forcing things, the Wu Wei. I love Forrest Gump. At the very beginning, a feather comes down and it lands right here on his foot, and he puts it right in here in his suitcase. And it's symbolic. And at the very end of the movie, the feather blows out and it glows into the sky. The whole movie is the feather in the wind, external locus of control, because this is what he has, but he's healthy. If he has to run, then he'll play football, or he'll do a marathon. If he does something else, he'll play ping pong, or just this, he'll be a shrimp boat captain. Whatever it is, he just goes with the flow and lets the world blow him about, but he doesn't let it bother him. Somebody in that movie lets it bother him a lot. Hey, I'm going to be in charge of my own life. I've got an internal locus control. I'm not the feather in the wind. That's for pussies. It's like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. Me, me, me. And so Lieutenant Dan, who I associate with a little bit too, you're just like, dang it, that doesn't work out good for him being internal locus of control. Now, another term I want to bring in, besides the terms we've been talking about, is self-efficacy. Now, I tend to have a high self-efficacy for some things, even though I have a low self-esteem. This is my sense of competence and effectiveness. Well, certain things like hiking a mountain or doing this or psychology, I've got a lot of efficacy. Now, being a football player, I don't. You know what I mean? Darts, it's like maybe. I'm not that good at it. But these are your feelings about your skill. To me, I can divorce that away from who I am as a person. Okay, not in a good way. Okay, so last little thing, and then we're going to come back to how this affects our self-esteem. And in this thing, success and failure can either make an internal or external attribution for my success and failure. Okay. Now, some of these internal things are not changeable. They're static, and some you can change. So this is the only thing you can change in life right here. There's a lot of things you can't change. Okay, so later on I'll go into the serenity prayer, okay? But literally. Okay, so now let's look at these. One of the things I can't change is my ability. It's just God-given. It's in my DNA. It's like I might want to be LeBron James, but I'm not going to be that good at basketball even if I practice every day. Now, one of the things I can't change either is task difficulty. Like if you're going to take the GRE or the LSAT, or if you're going to go play basketball, the hoop's 10 feet high. You can't change that. Now, some things I can change. Now, this is me. I'm going to just try hard. I'm going to try. You really can't change luck, but sometimes you get lucky and sometimes you don't. So that changes. That's the world. You don't change the world. You can only change this one thing, how hard you try. I don't want to get into the 4 agreements, but always do your best, right? Okay. So, how does it affect my self-esteem? Here it goes. Self-serving bias is what people do that have high self-esteem, almost cocky. When they succeed, they take credit for it, and when they fail, they say, it's not my fault, it's the world's fault. You don't understand, I'm a victim of circumstances. I got unlucky, or the task was too hard. Well, that's kind of an excuse, but one thing that excuse does is make them feel great about themselves. It's like, good things me, bad things not me. It's called a bias, because sometimes when you fail, it's your own goddamn fault. And sometimes when you succeed, your ass got lucky, right? So if you were unbiased, you'd be in the middle. Some successes are me and some aren't. And I don't want to get into politicians. I mean, I could pick on a bunch of them. It's like me. Even celebrities or, athletes are like that. I tend to do this. When I succeed, I go, it's the world. I got lucky. Or anybody could do that. That's easy. Easy peasy. But when I fail, here comes the sledgehammer. I'm going to beat Tim up. You dummy, you didn't try hard enough. You might not have the ability, but you can overcome that. Try harder. I don't want to tell you, but this is how I got my PhD. Is beating Tim up. I remember when Jerry Rice, one of the greatest receivers of all time, went to his Hall of Fame speech. He said every day when he stepped on the football field, it wasn't success that drove him, it was the fear of failure. He did not want to be second best. Does this make sense? Hopefully it doesn't, but that's what makes sense to me. I beat myself up. Yeah, I got a PhD, but I don't feel so good about myself. So that's the self-defeating bias. Okay, so some people that struggle with depression do this self-defeating bias. They've already have a lot of research on it, but one of the features of this is no matter how hard I try, it's going to end up like shit. Don't get me started, okay? Nothing I do matters. It goes back to that feather in the wind. It's like no matter how hard I try, here comes the wind. It just blows it all down again. I feel like Sisyphus pushing that rock up the hill. As soon as I get to the top, it falls back down on me. And a lot of people besides me that have depression struggle with this cognition, this sentiment. I usually tell this little story in class right here when you get that feeling that nothing you do matters, you don't make a difference in the world. And it's about starfish washed up on the beach that are going to die. One morning, according to this story, this man was walking along the beach trying to fling these starfish into the beach before, they dried out and died. And there's thousands and thousands on the beach, just like you see. And another man walked up to him and says, what are you doing? You can't possibly make a difference. And the first man reached down to a starfish and he flung it in the sea as hard as he could and said, it made a difference to that one. And so this is the way I see it in life. If I make a difference to one person, I've been a success. And the same thing for you. I don't know if you've ever read this book, The 5 People You Meet in Heaven, but the 5 people you meet in heaven aren't the people you think of. It might just be somebody that smiled at you on a day that you wanted to check out. That person that only knew you for 8 seconds, you know what I mean, might be one of those 5 most important people you meet in heaven, and vice versa. Because, see, to the world, you might just be one person. You say it's futile. But to one person, you might be their whole world and make the whole difference. Now, I struggle with negative thinking today, every day. I try to do my best, I don't get up and say, I want to just get into some negative thinking. I mean, even Joel Osteen, like I mentioned earlier, said you can't just put your mind on autopilot to him. But one of the books that I really like from Don Miguel Ruiz, besides the 4 Agreements, is The Voice of Knowledge. The Voice of Knowledge is so good. And in The Voice of Knowledge, he says this, the voice of knowledge can also be called the liar, the deceiver, the accuser of the brethren who lives in your head. The liar speaks in your language, but your spirit, the truth, that doesn't need a language. When you know something's true, I can't do this, you feel it right up here in your heart. You just feel it. I mean, I've tripped too many times. You know the truth, right? And so, but the liar is stronger, and most of the time the liar wins. Why? Because he speaks in your language and gets a hook in you. What does he say? Look at you, Timothy. Who do you think you are? You'll never make it. You're not smart enough, big enough, strong enough, rich enough, fast enough. The accuser of the brethren. Why should I even try? And that's when I say, get thee behind me, Satan, that Satan is in my head. Because when I think about my thought life, I struggle a lot. Hopefully you're not like me. The Native Americans, I haven't told this story in this class, but they say every morning we wake up, there's 2 dogs that live in our head, 2 wolves. One is the black wolf. He's the wolf that's like the liar. He tells me, you're not big enough, strong enough, fast enough. You're going to end up alone. Nobody loves you. On and on and on. And I can feed that dog and he'll get bigger and start to rule my day as I let him rule my thought life in the morning. See, the white wolf comes to speak a different thing. If I keep feeding this wolf, he's going to get bigger. The white wolf tells me the truth, and he says, Timothy, you are a child of God. I have plans for you. I have plans to rise you up, Jeremiah 29:11. I have a mission for you. And so I need to feed this dog every day, and I have to be more vigilant about it, just like someone with diabetes has to be more vigilant about their sugar intake than the normal person. So that's just my shtick, depression and anxiety. But when I get vigilant about feeding the white dog, my day goes better. And so this is the thing. Where's your thought life? Where's your thought life? Is it internal, external? If I can get off of this, are you going to focus on the truth or the liar? The truth or the liar? Which one are you going to feed today? Now, I have this quote. I have a bunch of quotes here, but I don't like this quote. It says, if you don't change your thinking, you will continue to recycle the same experiences That doesn't feel good. But it's true. I can tell you it's true right now. Okay, so another thing that depressed people deal with is lack of control. We talked about this with the feather in the wind example. Okay, so some of it's their thought life, but also part of this thought life is the feeling that they're out of control. So the stuff I'm fixing to show is kind of depressing, but it's very valuable. Seligman, Seligman, back in the 70s, started doing all this research on learned helplessness. Luckily, he does research on learned hopefulness now. I think that's what he calls it. But anyway, the contrast. So the reason I don't like it as depressing is because they do it with dogs. And what do? Well, they put a dog in a cage, and it has this divider right here in the middle. And they'll put him on one side, and he can jump onto the other side. No biggie. In the second condition, they'll put him on this side, but what they'll do is they'll zap this side right here with electricity so it forces him to jump over. The third condition is the depressing condition because no matter which side he jumps to, it's electrified and he'll keep jumping around for a while, but then eventually he'll sit down and take it. He learns to be helpless because nothing he does matters. The cognition we've been talking about, okay? Now what they do, 1, 2, 3, is they take these 3 groups of dogs and they put them into this cage in phase 2. Groups 1 and 2, they just jump right on over to the other side. Groups 3 just hunker down and stay on this side, even though they could escape the shock now, because they've learned that nothing they do matters. How do they fix the dogs? They have to physically put them on the side of the cage like a number of times, say, honey, it's okay now. You know what I mean? And then they get over it. And this is my whole problem with an abusive environment. When people go, just get over it. You know, it's like, go tell those dogs to get over it. You know, and this has a lot to do with depression because Seligman's research was cutting edge, but everybody's so mad because he's like, putting rats in, tubs of water where they can't escape, or shocking dogs and doing all this stuff. And it was really cutting edge, but it showed a lot about how when people get an early traumatic experience, it starts to color how they deal with situations that are solvable now. You ought to be able to solve this situation. Oh, that's depressing. Okay, so this is where the serenity prayer comes in. There are certain things in life that no matter what you do, you're in that third cage. You can jump all over the place. You're fucked. You know what I mean? But there are certain situations that seem like that third cage, but they're not. And in this situation, you have the power to do something, and you have to break through that fear from the past. And God knows which ones are different. That's discernment. And so I don't know if you're a person of faith, but I need discernment because I'm running around thinking I can change every cage, which is not healthy either, as Lieutenant Dan. Sometimes you got to roll with the punches. My friend Gideon, who died of cancer, he says this: God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot understand. I love that take on it. Okay, so my whole shtick has been attributions influence the way you see yourself, your self-esteem. Okay, so it's all about self-talk. God, I can't believe I'm giving this lecture because I don't know anything about this. Okay, so self-love starts and ends with the dialogue we have with ourselves. Oh my goodness. I just can't believe where I'm going right now. Gandhi says this: man often becomes what he believes himself to be. If you keep saying you can't do something, probably you can't do it, even if you could do it. But if you keep on saying I can do something, even if you can't do it, eventually you're going to be able to attain or acquire the capacity right here to do it. I like this idea. It's the truth of everything. Your biggest enemy is right here. It's called your head. Okay, Buddha says all that we are is the result of what we have thought. So I don't want to go new age, but it's the law of attraction and all this other stuff. Okay, so self-verification, which we learned about, I think, on the first week of class, but maybe I haven't talked about this one. Your beliefs about yourself govern the things, people, places, and things you select, and then they confirm your beliefs about yourself. This is the opposite, actually, of the self-fulfilling prophecy. In the self-fulfilling prophecy, how you believe about others makes that come true. We're fixing to talk about that. But this is self-belief. Self-belief influences my friends, the girlfriends, the kind of jobs, everything I pick. And that verifies this is who you are, Tim. Okay, so if I feed the black dog all the time versus the white dog, the black dog is going to make me choose different people, places, and things. And then I say, see, the black dog was right. It's like, yeah, but Tim, feed the other fucking dog. Okay, so your attributions also influence other people's self-esteem. Because if I keep saying, well, the reason you did that is because you're stupid or lazy, or you see what I'm talking about? So other talk. And if we were in my gender class, or not my gender class, I would go into this in more detail, but if my beliefs about others, women, influences the way I treat women, their reactions confirm my treatment of them. STEM, we could go into math and engineering and see how this has all played itself out. That's what I was saying if I was in my gender class. Now, you are dumb, lazy, ugly, this is where we become the black magician. Remember me talking about why I'm black magicians? I casting these spells by talking shit on people. But you say, oh, that has nothing to do with it. Yeah, it does, because then they eventually, it's like if you keep telling girls you can't do math, they don't take math classes, and they're, lo and behold, they can't do math. That's the whole thing. Okay, so here's Mr. Rogers about black magic. I feel that those who would try to make you feel less than who you are, I think that's the greatest evil. Wow. This is why I think he should be a saint. I'm not kidding. I just think he should be a saint. Okay, don't get me started on that. Okay. So the last little section has to do with success, or next to the last section, success and failure, taking responsibility for successes and failure, and when we don't. Self-handicapping, we should take responsibility, but we don't. What do? Sometimes we give ourselves a ready-made excuse. Like, we know we have a big exam coming up. Maybe I go out on Thursday night and get hammered. Then the next day when I don't do so good on the test, it's like, yeah, I would have done better if I hadn't got hammered. But the thing is, you chose to go get hammered, Tim. You know what I mean? And so you have this ready-made excuse that you came up with to, like, attribute your failure to. It's like, okay, that's weird. So here it's really your fault. You failed the test. You went out drinking. You did whatever. But sometimes you go, oh, yeah, but my friends and this, that, and the other, and there was a birthday party. And you make up all these excuses that are external reasons when really, why did you fail the test? It's looking at you right in the mirror, right here. Okay, so the second one is called false modesty. I like this one better because it deals with actors and football players, or all athletes really. When they get them up to the podium, they say, well, why'd you do so good? They don't start going, because I'm the shit. Some of them do. I like those guys. But a lot of them is like, whoa, it was my coach and God, my third grade teacher, and then they put everything out there. Some of the inside knows the reason they had a good game is them. It's me. And so they're not taking the credit they really deserve. I mean, football players are the greatest. They never say they had a good game when probably, no, they fucking killed it. You know what I mean? So they attribute something externally. And both of these biases, we're attributing external when we should take responsibility. I just wanted to say one more thing and then we're all done. It relates to personality and attribution. We go back to this whole thing. Remember, our behavior is a function of the situation and our disposition, which could include our personality. It could be moods and other things too. Now, one of the personality traits that I'm fascinated with is called self-monitoring. Why? Because I'm a social psychologist. Self-monitoring is how much do you change your behavior to fit in with other people? Do you change it a lot, or do you never change it? If you change it a lot, then you're known as a high self-monitor. High self-monitors are also known as social chameleons because they're always blending into their environment, kind of like the chameleon does. So if we went back to this B equals S plus D, for the high self-monitor over here, it's almost like that D goes away because their personality is the situation. Their behavior is always a function of the situation because they're always blending in, right? But if I'm over here to the low self monitor, if I can erase this off of here, like he or she never pays attention to the situation. I don't care who I'm around. I'm just going to say, God damn it, I don't care. You know what I mean? So that's not always polite or diplomatic, but in this way, they're always just staying true to themselves. I used to always say, oh, yeah, this side is the way you need to be. To thine own self be true. But in reality, you're never curbing your own behavior. And here, you're never being true to yourself. And I think that's why most of us are in the middle, where sometimes we're a chameleon, like at work or church or other places where we have to be. And other times we get around our true friends, we open up and come out of the box and say, here I am. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that lecture on attribution. I'll see you next time.